Hey everyone, it's Passion 3.21 Crucible, and today we are going to talk about how to take this path of building for the absolute bare budgets to put together Manabond. And I'm going to show you how to upgrade to this path of building, which does 20 million DPS. Now, our budget for this is going to be about 50 to 70 divines in total. And I'm going to assume you already have a Manabond set up, / you already know the basics of Manabond. If you do not, I encourage you to go watch the first video on Manabond and to catch up with that before watching this video on how to upgrade it further from there. One thing I do want to mention really quickly is when you import this into Path of Building, it might sometimes show you the incorrect DPS. This should be around 20 million or so, but for some reason the trigger rate gets messed up when imported. So all you have to do is just simply unallocate a attack speed node and reallocate it. And if it's not showing about 20 million DPS, it will make it 20 million DPS. It's just a very weird import bug with Path of Building. So let's talk about how you would spend a bunch of money to make this build better. Now, there's two ways to go about it. There is the spend all your money upfront on the big upgrade and go from there, or spend on your money on the smaller upgrades and then eventually get the big upgrade. I would implore everyone to follow the big upgrade first, since most of this build is tailored around it and the challenges that it adds to our build. So the big upgrade in this build is Squire. This allows us to put 3 supports inside of it, and whatever main skills in our weapon will be affected by the supports, effectively giving us a 6-link Manabond. This is going to be about 20 div or so, and it's going to be about a third of our budget. And if we go look quickly, I did just put the 3 supports on Manabond for the sake of making this a little bit easier to follow through on, but these would instead go in your supports. If we were to take off Awaken, Focus, Conk Effect, and Arcane Surge, as we can see, we only do 8 million DPS. So this makes Squire about a 2.3x damage multiplier over Prism Guardian. Now, there are a few downsides of that. The first one being that we don't get to benefit from the amazing reservation qualities of Prism Guardian. Not only does it gives us 30% increased reservation efficiency, but we then don't have to deal with a downside of arrogance, which makes the multiplier be twice as heavy. Because of this, we are going to have to drop some auras. So in this build, we are dropping Zealotry, we are dropping Grace, and for now, until we get a Mage Blood, we will be dropping Wrath and instead running Purity of Elements on the Eternal Blessing. So this is going to be a little bit, and I mean a little bit, because it really doesn't matter that much, squishier than the previous setup, because we do not have a amazing amount of evasion chance. We still are at 7k evasion because this build scales so well off of Shaper's Touch, but we will be losing a little bit of our EHP due to not being at evasion cap. That said, we will be effectively doubling our damage, so it's very much worth doing so. Now, the only problem with doing this is we still need a little bit of extra help to be able to fit all of our auras in. Now, you have 2 options here. Option 1 is going to be picking up the Life Reservation Mastery at Sovereignty. We're already doing this in the first place, but if you want a slightly cheaper setup for this, you will have to keep it. Option 2 is going to be getting 2 of these rings. These are Delve Life Reservation Efficiency rings. If you are keeping Sovereignty, you will only need 1. If you want to drop Sovereignty to get 4 passive points back, then you will need to get a second one of these. But for the purpose of my setup currently, we are only going to need 1. With this, you should be able to level your Clarity just a tiny little bit to level 5, as we do want to be as close as we can to 0 without being able to go over. We won't be able to do 6, but we can do 5. If you really want to, you can get an Anomalous Arrogance, which will allow you to put 2 more levels into Clarity, but it's really a massive waste of money. Another option as well is to run 2 rings, but if you're doing that, you then will need Anomalous Arrogance no matter what. But that will eventually save you 4 passive points by being able to drop this, but it's going to be substantially more expensive, especially since we do need some rolls on these rings. And finding a good life reservation ring is already pretty difficult as it is. You can opt to look for a fractured one and then craft it from there, but fractures for these are about 10 div each and a little bit out of the budget for 70-ish div or so. Our other new ring is now going to be a Carillion ring. Now, this is a % maximum mana ring, and what I'd recommend here is to find a fractured mana or fractured energy shield ring. I would definitely suggest to find fractured mana, because then what you could do is you can spam energy shield essences on this ring until you get whatever suffixes you need. One big other upgrade we're going to be making this build is actually hitting the CDR cap. I will talk about this a little bit since people seem to get a little bit confused, but we are going to aim to go directly to 37%. Before in the budget build, we weren't even at 9% CDR, not even be able to make the second breakpoint, but we are immediately jumping up to 37%. And because of that, we will need to get some strength due to the changes we'll be making to our belt. And getting strength on here would be really good and really easy with a mana fracture. Don't forget to dust your ring as well for some more life and mana modifiers to get a 12% implicit on your ring and a little bit more mana out of the flat. Moving on to the CDR part. So I will quickly talk about this just for the people who were getting confused in the previous setup, because this is going to play a very important role in making our DPS go to 20 million. So in this build, Mjolnir has a rate at which it can trigger itself. It is a 0.25 second cooldown on each trigger of Manabond. Now, if we get cooldown reduction, this will allow this number to go down. It won't show on the tooltip, but it will go down, meaning we could trigger Manabond faster. Now, because of the way the game works, and because only 15 instances of updating your character can be done per second, that means that there are very set points per second to where a event can happen. And because of this, it means we need specific amounts of cooldown reduction, because if I got 1% CDR and made this go from 0.25 to 0.24, that would do nothing, because the server would still round it to 0.25 to keep it in line with when a server tick happens, for it to actually do the math on did you actually trigger Mjolnir. So because of this, we need to get at least 9% cooldown reduction to be able to hit the next breakpoint, right? The first 0 to 8 do absolutely nothing. It will be rounded back up to 0.25. As soon as we get 9, it will be rounded to the next server tick, meaning we can fit more procs per second of Manabond. On top of this, we also need to be able to trigger this exactly every 0.25 seconds. And that is why we have a trigger rates, right? And this is simply just looking at your cyclone and looking at the attack rate here. I'm not going to go into all the math behind how these numbers have existed, but all you need to know is if you are in this bracket of 0 to 8, you do not want your APS to go over 3.79. If you do, because of the way rounding happens and because of the way the game will move your damage around to fit in with the server ticks, it will actually make you do less triggers. So that is why at 37% CDR, we do not want to have more than 5.05 APS. As you can see, this has exactly 5.04, and we do not want to go over this. If we went to 0.6, we would immediately lose DPS because it would move our damage ticks around and not make it in line with when Mjolnir can be triggered. So how do we get to 37%? Well, in Crucible, we can now get cooldown reduction either on a weapon or on a shield. So what you're going to have to do is you are going to have to find a Mjolnir with 10% or 15% CDR on it, or a Squire with 10% or 15% on it. These are not that difficult to get, and you could potentially just go buy a bunch of Mjolnirs, since they're only 40C each, and put a bunch of Crucible trees on them to see if you get CDR. It's very easy to actually get this node, and unfortunately it is a little bit pricey due to me buying this and making this pretty popular, but it shouldn't cost you more than maybe 5 div to find it on your own. If you cannot afford to do this, then unfortunately you will be stuck in the 9 to 37 bracket. There's absolutely no reason to get 30 or 35 or 36 or whatever CDR. If you do not have at least 37% CDR, having 9 is just as good as having none. So what you could either do on a slightly lower budget if you can't fully put this together is just find a CDR Mjolnir, or simply get the boots that we'll be talking about later, and that will keep you in the second breakpoint group. And eventually, once you get CDR Mjolnir or a CDR Squire, you can push up to 37%. So for our other CDR items, we are going to be replacing our Stygian with a Darkness Enthralled. This belt was buffed this season to have the roll not be a static 75% anymore, but instead roll from 50 to 100. Because of that, we can get a 100% increased effect one, and then we can get 2 jewels in it that have 3% CDR, which was added into the game about 2 seasons ago, and this makes this 6% CDR. Between the Mjolnir giving us 10%, these two giving us another 12%, and us having a pair of elevated Shaper cooldown reduction boots, That means we can hit exactly over 37% to be able to hit this with basically no loss to our build. Speaking of the boots, these are pretty typical cast on crit boots. This is not new technology. This is what every single cast on crit build currently uses to hit their breakpoints. Now, their breakpoints are a little bit different, but they do the same exact thing. These are going to be elevated Shaper cooldown reduction boots and elevated Hunter tailwind boots. Now, you do not need the tailwind, but I really recommend you getting it since tailwind gives you quite a lot of attack speed and it'll give you quite a lot of movement speed, making you pretty zoopy. Now, the way to make these is pretty simple, and there is a pretty extensive guide in the notes on how to actually get it. But if you simply just want to buy them, there are plenty of these boots up on trade because these are made over and over again, attempting to be crafted into triple elevated boots for the super, super high end cast on crit setups. What we want to do here is we want to get a open suffix on them. We do not want to have full suffixes because what we're going to be doing is crafting level 20 aspect of the spider on them. Now, this is a aura that makes everything around you just take more damage over a second or two. It ramps pretty quickly. And if we put it in our boots, since that is the only crafted slots that we have where we can fit in our auras, we can also end up putting our discipline, arrogance, and clarity in there. And aspect of spider will actually benefit from the arrogance, making it reserve life. This is my solution instead of running Tempest Shield, because this will give you 15% more damage versus Tempest Shield, which in my opinion doesn't really do anything. Again, you can make these on your own, and what you're aiming for is triple suffixes, right? So you're going to be combining Tailwind CDR, hoping open suffix, and then you are going to be trying to get mana on them, get movement speed through a veiled roll, and then you can have a pretty decent pair of boots. I would honestly expect, at least for the first few days of this guide being out, that ones with mana on them will be pretty cheap because typically for every build that's traditionally used these, except this one now, mana has been seen as a brick. So you might be able to find a high mana roll for very, very, very cheap. Moving on, there are a few more items that we need to take care of for our cast speed. I am going to really, really strongly recommend that you pay attention to this, as your jewels are going to be a very important part of tuning this build correctly. Across all of these jewels, we have different amounts of attack speed. Now, you do not need to get the exact jewels I have. The whole point is you want to combine a plethora of flat increased attack speed and increased attack speed while holding a shield, as you can see on this jewel, to get yourself to as close as you can to your breakpoint. Either 5.05 if you do manage to get to 35% CDR, or 4.33 if you do not manage to get to 35% CDR. Do not overdo it, and import these jewels one at a time into Path of Building and see how much attack speed you need. This is not a case of you want a maximum roll on these jewels. This is very much going to be a case of, okay, this jewel that I bought ended up having only 4%. Okay, so that means I need maybe a 5% roll or 6% roll. This is not a case of you want to get a max roll on everything, because that might give you simply too much attack speed. As you can see here, I actually end up losing DPS with this one because my trigger rate goes too high versus if it is the way it is. Outside of that, on the jewels, you're going to try to get strength if you can, because getting the strength is going to be kind of hard, especially with the life reservation ring probably not ending up being very good. I'm expecting you to get a kind of garbage one because these are going to be kind of hard to get a good one of unless you have a fractured one. And because we lose the strength on our belts, we are going to need to find strength on these. And if you can, try to find strength on these jewels as well in the belt, because they're going to be twice as strong. So you're going to get 30 strength out of them instead of just 15. Other than that, getting resistance is going to be a little bit difficult. If I take off the 3 flasks, as you can see, we are barely res capped. So you're going to try to find resistances wherever you can on these jewels. Now, because there's so many of these jewels in trade, typically, it shouldn't be very difficult to find attack speed and resistance jewels. And then if you can, try to fit maximum mana and maximum energy shield wherever else you can on these jewels, as that will give you quite a lot of extra defenses and quite a lot of extra damage. Prioritize mana over ES, since mana does give you ES as well, and mana is the way you scale your damage. The last thing to mention about all the changes is a little bit of a change on the passive trees. So originally we were pathing over here on the right. We are now changing our pathing to pathing on top and pathing through and connecting with Arcane Will instead of on the right, because this makes it so our split personalities are going to be a little bit better. You can actually potentially even drop these for non-accuracy rating ones if you actually end up getting enough intelligence. But this is going to have to be something that you decide for your build because you still need to be hit capped on Cyclone, and the accuracy rating on these is still probably going to carry you for the foreseeable future. The clusters are also upgraded to 8 passive clusters. They were 9 passive clusters just to showcase that even a worse cluster is good enough. But we do want those 2 passive points back. So we do want to upgrade them to 8. And otherwise, we are pathing over here and picking up Faith and Steel. Now, the reason we're doing this is because, again, we need resistances. And the mastery that we're going to be picking up here is actually a pretty good mastery. Recover 5% of energy shield over 1 second when you take physical damage from an enemy hit. But we have quite a lot of ES. So this mastery on its own actually gives us quite a lot of tankiness and makes it pretty comfy to play. We are dropping the Disciple and Training wheel, and instead we are pathing to the right to get more attack speed. This is going to potentially change for you if you cannot get to 35% CDR, as this might be too much attack speed, or you might get this and then get less attack speed on your jewels. Last thing that's changing is, and this might be a very expensive part, and this honestly might be bonus points that you will get at the end rather than being one of the first upgrades you're going to get, is a Impossible Escape with Necro Aegis. Now, what this is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to pick up Path of the Savant for free because you don't have to path to it. And we get Forethought and Dreamer without having to pick up the nodes leading to it. These nodes are not very good. They're just mana regen, and we don't really care about mana regen. The only good node is the first one, but this does save us 3 passive points here. The other tech that we're going to really care about later in the build, which is why I could recommend to pick one of these up before this spikes in price, because this will massively increase in price, is technology that we can do with a timeless jewel later. So the next update on this video is going to be going over the mirror tier setup. And in the mirror tier setup, we are going to be picking up a Righteous Providence Flesh and Flame. And this is going to make us gain crit chance per point of strength or intelligence, whichever one is lower. That means we need to catch up our strength to our intelligence. And the easiest way to do that is by getting a Lethal Pride in this socket. Lethal Pride is a jewel that gives us strength on each of the small nodes and gives us an added little tiny benefit on the big nodes. So what we could do here is we can do this, and we can look for big nodes on the other notables within the Necro Aegis circle to be able to give us much higher strength numbers. One of the main attractions of this is percent strength. And typically with this setup, we would have to path to Forethought and Dreamer without Necro Aegis. And if, for example, we were able to find a seed that had percent strength on Ash, Frost, and Storm, we would have to waste 3 passive points to pick it up. But with this, we'd only waste 1 passive point, and it'd make getting something good on Path of Savant much more attractive. Meaning you have a lot more choices on getting 5% increased strength on every single node within the circle than just the few points we'd be picking up while still saving some passive points. I'll talk more about this in the next video, but Necro Aegis not only for now gives us quite a lot of passive points, which allows us to put this tree together for only level 97, but it will help us later, and that's why I really recommend to get one before. Oh my god, this jewel is going to go up in price quite a lot, but yeah, get one before it goes up in price because it saves you passive points and it'll be good later. Last thing I want to quickly mention is this is a level 97 tree. Now, if you are a lower level and you still have a little bit of money left over, since everything I described minus Necro Aegis is probably only about 50 div or so, maybe 55 div, what I'd really recommend is spending about 3 to 4 div to actually hit level 100. 5 rate carries are very, very cheap. And from level 90, you can get to level 100 with about maybe 5 div and carries or so. They're really easy to do. You just need to cap your chaos resistance. So you can just get a chaos resistance flask. You put on some chaos resistance rings, right? You don't need an actual functioning build. So you can drop like your end again for a chaos resistance helmet or whatever you'd like. You can even just choose to drop a few points and just pick up Asylum to get some chaos res. But you just need to get to chaos res cap. And then you get to AFK, and that will let you get level 100 for about 5 div. And think of that as an upgrade for your build. Passive points are very, very good. And because of that, spending 5 div for, at least in this case, I'd be level 97. So it'd be maybe 3 div, maybe 4 div for 3 passive points. That's really good. 1 div for passive points is quite a lot of extra power. For that, I could pick up a jewel socket here, also giving me 20 strength. and giving me a jewel socket, which either allows me to get more mana and ES or allows me to get lower rolls on other jewels in other places and have an easier time. I could potentially be saving myself from having to buy a multi-div item that I need because this build does become a little bit constrained on all the things that it needs, into instead letting me get a 50 seed jewel because I can get 2 slightly weaker jewels that are even better than that multi-div item that I was going to get instead. Or if you don't want to do that, you could always just go and path more mana. For example, you could pick up mana here. You could always pick up Constitution, which would give you a little bit of extra ES. You could always pick up Purity of Flesh for a little bit of ES and Chaos Res too. You could do quite a lot of things with those 3 passive points, is what I'm trying to say, and it'd be very much worth your time. That's all I have to say for this. I hope that this answered most of your questions. If you have any more questions, please do refer to the notes. I did update the notes for the upgraded version of this. If you have any other questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, or please feel free to ask me on Twitch. I'll be more than happy to help you in any way you need. And again, I'm really sorry if I double the price of all these items because it seemed like we did that last time with the cheap version of Manabond. I hope you're enjoying this build. I hope you have fun, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.